Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to Brookings India. My name is Constantino Xavier. I'm a fellow here in the foreign policy program at Brookings India. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to the second round of what we call the Back to the Future series. The Back to the Future series is actually, like many good ideas, started with my colleague Dhruva Jaishankar, who a year ago knew I was working on the neighborhood policy. And he said, we know so much about the history because we've done work, or in my case, I was lucky to do a PhD, do some archival research about these issues. And he said, why don't we do one, for example, on Sri Lanka, on the 30 years of the de-induction debates of the Indian peacekeeping force, the IPKF, in '89 at least, it began the big debate on how to de-induct from Sri Lanka. So I thought instead of doing a one-off event, which sometimes we do also, let's do a series where we try to focus specifically on events that were marking in Indian foreign policy and security affairs, and try to bring back not only scholars who've written about them, but actually make the focus of the event the people who were engaged, who were the key participants, the key witnesses to those events. That's what we did in March this year with the first Back to the Future series, exactly here on the IPKF. We had key participants from the military, General Kalkat, who was commanding the force at that point. We had members of the diplomatic community, the former High Commission Sri Lanka. We had a former intelligence officer who joined us and gave a perspective from how the RANW looked at the IPKF and the de-induction. So the idea is really to revisit an issue that was important for the country and that remains important for the country, and expose people, especially in the younger generation who were not privy to those debates and those moments, to the lessons we can really draw from those issues. And it gives me great pleasure today to host the second Back to the Future series here at Brookings India, curated by our non-resident fellow, Anit Mukherjee. Anit Mukherjee is a non-resident fellow here. He's based in Singapore. He's an assistant professor at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, National Technological University in Singapore. And let me say a few words just because I have to introduce the moderator. This is Anit's panel. He's brought this together. He's curated this, and that's the idea that a lead scholar of Brookings or outside in the future will take initiative and bring these people together, because he is in many ways the emerging expert on this issue. His book is coming out later this year, Absent Dialogue. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anit. Besides being a colleague, he's also a friend. And let me just say a few words of why it's important to have people from the younger generation curating these events. Because we're studying them from the present. We are going into the archives, trying to, in many ways, in an inferential method, as a detective, bringing the various pieces of puzzle together. So we rely on evidence, rely on sources, rely on information. We can do it in the archives, but more important than the archives, which are written documents, which only convey a part of the reality, are the people who were witnesses and who were shaping the events during these critical moments. So we rely tremendously, I think, Anit, you and your work rely tremendously on, I think, over 100 interviews with key people who are involved in a variety of civil military issues. I was lucky to do the same thing and interview many people when I did the Sri Lanka case study, for example. And therefore, it's very important for us to get access to people who really shape these events and have them, in many ways, contribute to our understanding and to future generations' understanding how and why they acted they did. Now, this will never be a final discussion. I think this is an ongoing process. There are people doing great work today, still in the archives, interviewing more people. So this is a process which will go on, and to which we hope to make a small contribution to the Back to the Future series. Now, in Anit's case, it's particularly important because Anit was also a participant in some way of the event. Anit is a retired a major from the Indian Army. Anit is what is known in our academic circles as a scholar warrior. I know you don't like to hear this, but that's how we call people who generally served in the military and then become scholars in trying to understand the larger dynamics of it. We also have diplomat scholars We have, hopefully one day we'll also have intelligence analyst scholars in this country. But we need that combination of people who bring the practical experience together with the scholarly rigor, which is evidence-based, and which is really a service to the future generations who want to understand what happened in the country, and is also a service to public policy and thinking in government on how to improve processes, avoid mistakes, and improve processes. So nobody better than Anit to host this. Anit, it's over to you. The structure will be Anit will be hosting these 2 panels over the next 2 hours. We'll have a Q&A towards the end, right, Anit? And then we'll close it down around 5 o'clock when we all go home and watch cricket and India score another victory. Thank you.
When I was first asked to do this, I loved the idea of Back to the Future. Back to the Future, in part because I was an 80s kid and I thought of myself as Michael J. Fox. When I was first approached to do this by Constantino, I loved the idea. Thank you so much. In part because I'm an 80s generation kid and I always thought of myself as a Michael J. Fox, right? For those people who have seen the movie. Until somebody from Brookings told me I'm more like the Doc Brown, like the crazy scientist with his hair all over the place, than Michael J. Fox. So that's a way to kind of knock me down. I've stopped fighting battles. That was a long time ago. It was a previous generation. Nowadays, the only battles I fight is with my wife, and as every Indian man knows, that's a losing battle, right? You will lose that every single day. Firstly, a big thank you to Tino, Brookings, everyone here who's been assembled to put this together. Also, a big thank you to our panelists who have come from outside Delhi and have been participants in a war that I think was very important for my generation. And that I think the intention of this series, which is to bring the ideas behind the war and the discussions therein to a younger crowd, is worthwhile. Before I begin with the operation, so I thought the best way to do it is have 2 panels. One is an operational panel where we talk to the 2 people who were on the ground, and then we have a strategic panel. I will introduce the panelists to you subsequently. One small kind of an administrative note. General Alik is a little late. His flight is on the way. He's assured us he's on his way, so he might join a little late. But we hope he'll be here for the strategic panel. And also, this is on the record, right? So we are live streaming it. So the intention is we are wanting to engage with all of us to talk about, I think, among the most important incidents for our generation of military officers. Before I start the operation panel discussion, however, because the average age of an average Indian is, I think, under 30, and so probably a lot of the people were 10 years old when the war was being fought. I want to do a very brief 5-minute discussion of the war and the legacies of the war, right? In a way to sort of talk about what I think as a historian now, because I'm an academic historian, of the important issues emerging from the war. So I'm going to talk about, sorry, is this working? About the intrusions in Kargil, right? So go back a step. If you have the access to Google Maps, please have a look at the Google Map description of the line of control, right? Which tells you about what a forbidding terrain it is. So the alignment of the LOC between Gurez and Siachen, before the 99 war, it was not held much. In the winter months, both armies used to pull back. It's really forbidding terrain. It does not follow a logic of geography. It was undefined, it just goes on like that. What we know is in winter of the 1998, spring of the 1999, there was an intrusion by Pakistani army troops that infiltrated deep into Indian territory. They came in there because the Indian army at that point of time, unspoken agreement said, during winter months, we are not going to man the border physically, so they pulled back. What we know about the plan was it was done by a small cabal of generals who misled the political authorities in Pakistan. This is what we know now, right? And second, Pakistan, even then and even now, denies that it was a Pakistan military operation. This is what, in sum, triggered the Kargil War / intrusion. This was the triggering event for the war, which we're going to talk about today. And the intrusions were deep. I mean, they were all the way up to, they were all the way up to here, up to the NH1 alpha. If you look at the timeline, right, it was in the first week of May that we detected the infiltration. And after that, and I'm going to go through this very quickly, the Indian Air Force launched its airstrike on the 26th of May. By the 31st of May, there was a general acknowledgement that it's a warlike situation. And then after that, India wins the Battle of Tololing on the 13th of June. It has been described as the turning point of the war, if you look at the Battle of Tololing. And along the same time, there is international pressure on Pakistan, where the Americans tell the Pakistanis to withdraw their troops by June 15th. And then if you look at the timeline after that, by the July 4th, the Tiger Hill is captured. After that, there is a de-escalation after that, where India basically declares that this is a victorious operation. And then the important point here is on July 29th, India announces the creation of the Kargil Review Committee, which I think is among the most important steps, which was an unintended consequence of the war. Right? It wasn't planned for, but it led to the most significant transformation of the Indian armed forces since independence. Again, this was not why the Pakistanis planned the operation. Right? They didn't want to transform the Indian military, but it was a complete unintended consequence of the war. And I think it was a great step for the Indian military in that way. What are the kind of big controversies emerging from the war? There were three major controversies. First, was intelligence available? On this, the RAW and IB claimed that they had given adequate intelligence to the armed forces, and the army still claimed that they didn't get real actionable int. It was a generic int which didn't have actionable value. Second, jointness emerged as a major point of discussion in the war. And there were two kind of stories to this. One, that the Air Force says that the Army was not very forthcoming with the information. The Army says that the Air Force was not forthcoming to engage and start the operations. And second is the interoperability debate, that there was a lot of questions about can the Air Force and the Army operate together in terms of communication systems, in terms of operation rooms, and this emerged as a major contention of the war. The Navy played an important role in signaling diplomatic, the resolve of the country, but they did not fight, so they were kept out of the war. And the third thing was about the nuclear angle, which was there a nuclear angle to the Kargil War, right? Did the fact that both kind of countries had conducted tests a year ago, did that play a role in the actions of India and Pakistan? We can talk about that later. What are the consequences of the war? One is there was a militarization / deployment all along the LOC. India created a new corps called 14 Corps, and as a consequence of the war, it meant that those areas which were not manned earlier are now manned permanently, right, by both sides. Second, there was a greater focus on enhancing combat effectiveness within the military, within the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army also, right? This was a wake-up call to both the services to say that, look, we need to operate more closely together. And to the credit of both services, they have taken steps since then to seriously engage. So you can make a pre-Kargil assessment and a post-Kargil assessment that there's a seriousness within all three of services to say, we need to work together. Is it adequate? Is it enough? I would argue no, but we can discuss that later. And third, and the one I'm interested in academically, is the post-Kargil defense reforms process, right? You had the kind of Kargil Review Committee. If you're interested, you should read this, which was, and I think it's a great step that they did, which they kind of published in the public domain, which had not happened before, which allowed for an unprecedented debate about defense reforms, which I think was fantastic. And then you had the 2001, the group of ministers report that created new structures like the integrated defense staff. But that did not create a chief of defense staff. We would speak about that afterwards also in the strategic panel. When I step back from this, what are the legacies that I think as an academic of the Kargil War? First is defense reforms, right? Before the Kargil War, for 10 years before that, there was a vibrant debate within the Indian strategic community about the need to have defense reforms. Go to IDSA, go to USI, look at the Strategic Analysis Journal, look at the different journals, and there was a vibrant call from a generation of officers who were saying, we need to create better structures for national security, we need to create, enhance jointness. But the fact is, it took a war for us to kind of implement those reforms. And so the bigger conceptual question is, do democracies need crisis for change? And anecdotally, I would suggest yes. Right? You had the economic, the balance of payment crisis in 1991 that opened up the Indian economy. There were a lot of cries in the Navy to create a coastal command and a Coast Guard kind of protection. Not until the 2008 attacks in Mumbai was serious attention paid to this. And so the armored corps in me says that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Unless you cry, unless you create the noise, people will not pay attention to it, which is a sad takeaway, right? And because you're seeing a similar demand right now over the last 10 years that we need to have the second generation defense reforms. This could talk about Chief of Defense Staff, Permanent Chairman Chiefs of Staff, more joint billets, more joint commands, more joint education, and you are seeing a vibrant debate again happen within the strategic community. But the actions have not translated on the ground. So if I was to be kind of unhappy about this, I'm like, maybe we need another crisis that goes badly, except the Indian in me would say, we can't afford another crisis that goes badly. Right? We don't need a crisis for change. Second, could you press that? Ugh. Sorry. Sorry about that. I think I just... Second was the learning from the war, right? And here's where I would say, look at issues like war history and how do we teach young officers about the war. Here's where I would point out two books to you by the Indian, the Navy, which is the official history of the Indian Navy. They have taken an effort to look at their archives to create 2 volumes of the official history of the Indian Navy. I have a problem with this, but at least it's a good first step, which is that they have given access to their historians to write their history. The Air Force and the Army has not done that. What is more problematic is even now, 20 years after the war, we are not able to talk to the younger officer lot, squadron leaders, majors, colonels about what happened in the war because we don't have an official history of the war. Right? In 2013, 2014, the MOD ordered an official history of the war to be written. The Air Force and the Navy shared its operational documents with the team that is designated. The Army and especially the MO branch said, no, we cannot share it because the information in there is of current operational value. Which I think is a spacious excuse, right? Because if you look at the historiography of the war, there are enough books that have maps on them that give the information if you're looking for it. Y.M. Bumby's book, other books that actually have maps that give the information. B, there is something called redaction. If you think there are documents that you're not willing to completely share, go through the documents, redact the documents. Except it has to be somebody's job to redact the document. And there's nobody's job in the Army headquarters, or for that matter, Air Force and the Navy headquarters, who sits together and says, this is the historiography that we know, this is public common knowledge, we can do the redaction as we want. And so my problem is that even the current generation of middle to kind of senior level officers don't have access to what happened in the Kargil War and thereafter. The third point is the geopolitical big picture thing, right? One is, was Kargil a fork in the road for India-Pakistan relations? Before Kargil, you had the Lahore peace process. Now imagine India-Pakistan if Kargil had not happened, because after that, both countries went downhill. There was Kargil, there was attack on the Indian Parliament, there was attack on the J&K Assembly, there was the Kandahar hijacking, there were years of violence that came in thereafter. And before Kargil, there was this bonhomie and this expectation that this is the peace track, this is the peace process. When the Pakistani PM now talks about the peace process currently, you have to ask yourself who killed the Kargil, who killed the Lahore Peace Initiative? It was the Pakistan Army. So when they talk about peace today, is the Army on board for this or not? I think that's a very important question that needs to be integrated. I don't know the answer to that, but that needs to be asked about, is Kargil a geopolitical fork in the road? Two is, among the big takeaways of the Kargil War was India acted as a responsible restraint power. That it did not cross the LOC, even though we took more casualties as a consequence of that, and we will talk about that in the operational panel. And third is, because the US sort of took on India's side of the position, did it create the opening for the subsequent transformation in US-India relations? Right? This is a big question mark, because there is an argument out there that it would have transformed anyway. But was Kargil the sort of triggering event that told the Indians that we could go ahead? Last but not the least, one of the big consequences of Kargil was the costs of war, right? And I've just put on a few people who died over there, right? Squad leader Ahuja, Vikram Bal, and these are famous people. As far as we know, there were 527 Indian casualties. I think this requires 527 different stories, because we are talking about people who have lost a father, a brother, a son, and this is irreplaceable, right? Their stories, they're the ones who bore the costs of war. And the costs of war applied on both sides. There were casualties on the Pakistani side also, which was even worse, because at least on the Pakistani side, they abandoned the soldiers. They did not accept the fact that they were Pakistani soldiers. And so the question is, and again, I've been acquainted with this online thing called Honor Point. I don't know who is the one who does the Honor Point kind of website, which documents the lives of the fallen. I think it's a fantastic initiative, because if I've lost someone close to me, the last thing I want is them to be forgotten. And I think it's good that we have a national kind of war, like a memorial. That is a very good thing. But I also think it's good to like contribute to an online memorial. And so I would like urge you to look at the website and add on to that we need to know the names and the stories of all 527 of them. Because those are the immediate costs of the war, and that is also a big takeaway, right? We should not lose kind of track of the fact that there are people who have lost someone dear to them on both sides, right? This is to be taken. What I wanted to do now was talk about the operational panel, so I would make a request to you. I wanted to introduce the two officers who are part of the operational panel, Air Marshal Menon and General Puri. I have spoken to them earlier while I was conducting research, and I was completely gobsmacked, to use a word, at their candor, their intellectual integrity, and their involvement with the war, right? I mean, one was AOC Jammu and Kashmir, and the other was 8th Mountain Div Commander, the most important division that fought in the war. So a big thank you for coming. Thank you so much. If you could pick up the mics over there. So if I could ask you the first question of Air Marshal Menon, I think it is on already. Okay. Could you describe what is the job of AOC of Jammu and Kashmir? Very basic, because I don't think, everyone is acquainted with AOC Jammu and Kashmir.
Right. The Air Force has got officers with each army command. The Northern Command had the AOC J&K as their advisor and the rank of an Air Vice Marshal. The only difference between the AOC J&K and the other AOCs of advanced headquarters was that AOC J&K was also responsible for the operational control of 6 airfields, Srinagar, Leh, Udhampur, Jammu, Leh and Thois. All these airfields came under this thing. Basic idea of AOC J&K was to liaise with Indian Army. There is a specific job apart from the operational aspects of air maintenance of Siachen and other areas. That means all the aircraft of the Indian Air Force like AN-32 and IL-76 and the helicopters, the Mi-17s, at that time some of the Mi-8s and the Cheetahs and Chetaks were supplying items from Chandigarh, from Srinagar to Thois and Leh, and from there they were being transported by lighter aircraft to the posts manned by the Indian Army. So the basic job of AOC J&K was to liaise operationally with headquarters Northern Command, plus look after supply of the forward areas of Jammu and Kashmir manned by the Indian Army personnel.
Thank you so much. If I could ask you a specific question about an authorship that you've done, which is your article that you wrote 10 years ago, which is planning for joint operation, it needs an environment of trust and confidence in each other's ability. The Indian Army is a fine professional force, but when it comes to intelligence sharing, there is a level of reluctance on its part. In the initial phase of the operation, this is explained away by the fact that the Army did not know the things, and this is the crucial sentence. But even after the later briefings and planning sessions, I had a distinct impression that only a part of the picture was being revealed, and so it was not completely, open with the operational picture. If I could ask you to speak a little bit about this.
Yeah, General Puri is sitting with me, and both of us went through Kargil. I must tell you, his job was far more difficult because I was grey before Kargil. He became grey after Kargil. So, this is a very serious point that I have always felt that Army used to hold back things from us. It never completely told us as to what is happening where. Even during the Kargil operations, I was the first person to receive the information from the Chief of Staff of Headquarters Northern Command that there are some infiltrators on couple of posts who have captured couple of posts, and we require the Air Force's help. From there, they wanted the Mi-35 and the Mi-25, which could not be made available because the Mi-35 or the 25 could not cross Zojila, which is at a height of 3,500 meters or so. And the Mi-35 was basically for European theater to act against tanks. So from that time onwards, things happened. Whether the Army knew more about this, I do not know. But later, after all this happened, by that time, later on we came to know that about 150 posts had been established by the Pakistani, 130 posts along a 150 kilometer frontage. How much the Army knew, how much they were telling us, we were very unsure. And when it comes to the delay in the Air Force, I will explain as to why the delay happened or if it was a delay at all. Later on, from after my AOC JNK tenure, I went to Delhi as the ACS operations, which is a crucial job in the Air Force. One day, there was a call that the Army wants some strike missions along the LC, along the line of control, on some areas which the Pakistanis have captured within our side of the LC. So we brought in the Mirages again, and one person, we were supposed to bring the Mirages again. I sent a group captain to the Army headquarters, the MO Directorate, to get the briefing. During the briefing, this Army officer told the Air Force officer that not this particular point, there are a couple of other places also which have been infiltrated. Now, as per the Army, this was not supposed to be told to the Air Force. And when we came to know of it and the Army came to know of it, I believe that that Army also was posted out. So, no, that was the level that they didn't inform us. If he had informed us, and we wouldn't have told everybody, or we could have taken action against those particular points also. These may be a stray incident or not, but it indicated a state of lack of trust between the Air Force and the Army. But I must also add that in 1971, when I took part, we had exceptionally good relations Our fighter aircraft controllers, forward aircraft controllers went with the Army, their GLOs came to us, and we had an exceptionally good thing. But over a period of time, there has been a reduction in the trust level between the two services, which needs to be, the gap needs to be reduced and probably closed one day.
So perhaps an approach is to have a common joint ops room, right? Because if the Army keeps its own operations room and the Air Force, so if it keeps its own operation room where all the information comes in, could you describe to me your involvement with the operational planning of the war, where you called into 8 Div headquarters or 15 Corps of headquarters, and were you completely in the loop about the progress of operations?
It was like this. I moved my headquarters from Udhampur to Srinagar. And Srinagar, there's a place called Badami Bagh, which is about 20 odd kilometers from the Air Force station, where 15 Corps was headquartered. They used to send their officers to Srinagar. We used to sit down with them and plan the next day's operations. In the first day's operation, they had already given the points to be struck. We had planned it from the most optimum, attack direction and all. The directions which came to us on that day was that you will only attack on our side of the LC, which caused us a lot of problems, and it became not the most optimum actions. But whether we could have, our planning was okay at the lower levels. Our planning was quite okay. Army used to come, their officers used to come and tell us which is their maximum, where have their troops reached, so that we don't do blue on blue damage. And that sort of information kept flowing most of the time, and that was quite satisfactory.
Thank you so much. Sir, if I could ask you, incidentally, if you haven't read the book, this is a fantastic book about the Kargil War, 8 mountain dev operations. I would recommend that you definitely get it. Sir, even you have to do your book, so no kind of pressure on you. Sir, if I could ask you about the jointness aspect, right? As far as I understand it, this was a division battle, or was it a core battle?
It was a division battle.
And did you have any Air Force officers in your division ops room?
No, we didn't have any Air Force officers, but that time AVM Menon used to visit the headquarters along with the Air Chief or with the Army Chief. And at the ground level, I don't think we had much of a problem. But I don't want to, make this into an Army and an Air Force sort of a discussion. We didn't have that. What he's saying is perhaps correct. As far as the Army is concerned, we were also not very sure as to where the intrusions had taken place. If you recall at that time, I think the Corps Commander, he mentioned that we will evict them within 48 hours. I think the Corps Commander, the Army Commander had made that statement. Because we were not ourselves very clear as to where the intrusions had taken place, and there was a certain amount of denial also perhaps. But as the operations progressed, as our gathering of information improved, like our troops in contact, when they started feeding us the information, when the air started feeding us the information, then we had a clearer picture. And that is how I think the tactical battle was built as far as the intelligence about the enemy is concerned.
If I could ask you something about, when you're a div commander, you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulder. Could you explain to me the darkest day of the war for you? In the sense, the biggest doubt or your biggest concern?
Yeah, I think darkest day, I won't say I had one dark day or one bright day. When you lose troops, when you lose young officers, when you lose your men in battle for which you're responsible, every day is a dark day, I think. And this war we fought, where we lost a lot of young officers and men and JCOs, 268 was the number which was just for my division alone. And that's a very large number of casualties. So finally we did come out victorious, but at a very heavy cost. So every time you lose somebody, and when you meet these young officers, you talk to them, you talk to the battalion before it's being launched into the operation, you go and give them a pep talk, you shake hands with these boys, and in the evening when you're sitting in your operations room and monitoring the battle, you come to know so-and-so has been killed. I mean, this leaves a very deep impact on you and a mark on you. I mean, it's so, I won't say one day it was a dark day. I think there were many dark days to that day.
So for you, I would imagine it's the first 2 days of the air operations where the planes went down and the Mi-17 was shot down. You had there was an argument about the flares not working. The flares were in disuse. There is an account emerging that the Mi-17, which was brought down, didn't have functional flares. Is that true?
Before I come to your thing, I must say about 8 Mountain Div, which was commanded by my colleague here, Mohinder Puri. They did a wonderful job. The raw courage and the commitment displayed by them was something to be very proud of as we all Indians. Yes, about your question about the May 17, which was brought down. On that day, it was supposed to be all helicopter missions were to be preceded by a fighter mission. That was the rule put down by WAC commander and air headquarters, that the fighters will go strike the point followed by the helicopters. Now in this case, the 4 helicopters, we start up always, whenever Air Force we have a mission going up of 4 aircraft, a 5th aircraft is kept ready in case one of the main mission people fall out for whatever reason. In this case, the 4 aircraft, which was the main aircraft, all had flares. Unfortunately, the 5th aircraft, the standby aircraft, did not have flares, and one of the aircraft on the main fell off. It could not take part in the mission. So this aircraft took his position, and it went up. All 3, the first 3 aircraft, we could see the flares being fired, and all the Anza missile and Stinger missiles being drawn away from the helicopter. The 4th one, because he did not have flares, he could not save himself, and he took 2 or 3 direct hits by this thing. Also, before the war started, one Canberra had got a missile strike by a surface-to-air missile of the shoulder-fired missile of the Stinger Anza class, and its right engine was damaged. It landed in Srinagar. We knew that there were Stinger missiles with the Pakistanis on the heights, but we underestimated the number of missiles that they could fire. And also one more thing that we learned later on is that the effectiveness of a missile, a Stinger missile or a Anza missile, depends on the difference of temperature between the jet exhaust of the aircraft, the target, and the missile head. Because of the cold temperatures there, the missile head temperature was colder. Therefore, the difference in temperature became higher and the missiles became more effective. So we thought that at altitude they would suffer in their performance, but no, they improved in their performance. We did not calculate for that. It's only later we learnt about it.
Thank you so much. Sir, if I could ask you, and this is a question about the LC crossing, right? In your book, you have said there was a feeling that allowing the forces to cross the LOC could escalate the situation, and with both the countries having a nuclear bombs, it could have been disastrous. It is my firm conviction, adequately reinforced over the years after the Kargil War, that we should have called Pakistan's bluff, and you basically are arguing that maybe we made a mistake by not crossing the LOC. If I could ask you to comment on that.
Definitely. I think we could have reduced the duration of the war. We could have reduced the casualties if we were given permission to cross the line of fire. The fact that was a very strong terms of reference which was given to us, it made our task that much more difficult. But I'm talking at the operational level. See, there are two things. One is the operational level, which militarily affected us. The second is at the national level, they perceive it perhaps in a different way. And that is why the decision was taken. We did get a lot of acclaim for not crossing the LC and having a ceasefire, when militarily I think both were wrongly timed. The LC we should have been allowed to cross, and the ceasefire also perhaps came a bit before we could fully cause adequate destruction to the Pakistan army in their withdrawal. If we were allowed to cross the LC, we could have taken a sort of a maneuver where we could have caught all these guys at the back while they were withdrawing back after the orders to them were given. That we couldn't achieve. So militarily I think it was not in our favor, but then of course there are issues beyond the military also which are also of importance. Now why I said this nuclear bluff, I think even that time we thought that we should not go by the, just a year had passed when both the countries had become nuclear powers. But it is always Pakistan which has been using the nuclear sort of a threat to us, whether it was in Kargil or whether it was subsequently. And every time there is a statement which indicates that if you do something, we are a nuclear nation and we can respond. So I think it's time that I'm glad we've done it in the recent past, and I'm sure we've got this well under our control.
Thank you so much. Sir, would you agree with that? That the fact that you couldn't cross the LOC constrained your operational effectiveness?
Yes, I agree entirely with General Mohinder Puri. Most of our attack directions, before we got the orders from above not to cross the LC, most of our attack directions were north-south. North-south attack direction means either we attack from the north towards the south into Indian territory, or attack from Indian territory across the LC and go into Pakistan, because the targets were so situated. If that happened, definitely our accuracy levels would have been much higher. But with the imposition of this thing that you cannot cross the LC, we had to change all our attack directions on at that night, on 25th night, to a east-west direction. Definitely that was suboptimal, and it reduced our effectiveness.
Thank you. I think it's a good question to ask, right? This constraint about the LOC being crossed and not being crossed is something we would discuss again in the strategic.
But some of the aircraft could have crossed it by mistake. You don't know.
Thankfully for that. Shh. So I had a question for you. Could you describe about how we treated the bodies of the enemy dead and what happened to them? Because we lost soldiers, we got them back. I know as a junior captain, I could see convoys of black flag trucks coming down the hill towards Srinagar. So that's etched in my mind. How did we treat the enemy dead?
I think the ethos of the army is we treated our own dead with a lot of respect, and we also treated the Pakistani soldiers who were killed with respect. We gave them a decent burial, a military burial. We got the Maulvis airlifted, made helipads, and had a proper ceremony to give them a proper burial. So it's disgraceful, I think, on the part of Pakistan, and I have no regrets in saying that and reiterating that how can a country leave their dead behind? How could an army even afford to leave their dead behind? That is not our teaching. And I think it was disgraceful on Pakistan's part to leave such a large number of troops. My division alone buried about 145 bodies.
Are these still on Indian soil?
Yes, of course. They are dug 6 feet down. And they are in Indian soil, very much on Indian soil. And still these people have not claimed these bodies. Neither have they even accepted that they were their own soldiers who were participating in these operations.
Thank you. Sir, again, go back to Army Air Force, not because it is conflictual, but just because it is interesting, right? And I think it is something that we need to learn from. How did the Air Force communicate with the Army operating on the ground? Air Force jets up in the air. Did they have the ability to actually speak to the Army? Because among other things, I heard that Air Force used to go up, and because they used to fly in kind of radio silence, it couldn't actually speak. So the ability to actually do a battle strike assessment, what was that?
No, while our aircraft are in the air, there is no direct communication with the Army. We don't plan it that way. Our communication, if at all, would be with the forward air controller if he is so positioned. We did not have forward air controllers. So our aircraft did not communicate with the Army, because there is no such link provided anyway, no channel provided for this purpose. Actually, even for our ground communications, the Air Force had a lot of problems. Finally, we had to depend on the ASCON, the Army channels, to communicate with our higher headquarters. So what is a great change in the Air Force today is the state of communications. Today, the Air Force communications, at least to me, looks absolutely out of the world compared to what it was in 20 years back. We couldn't communicate. Today, any Air Force officer can pick up and talk to any other Air Force personnel anywhere in India or wherever he is operating. I think that's one of the main improvements we have made since Kargil. Thank you.
I want to talk about the historiography of the war, the way we have assessed it, studied it, analyzed within the services, right? Was there an Air Force committee or a commission or a study that went into analyzing the Kargil War? If yes, who did it? And is it accessible to junior officers today?
The Air Force carried out certain seminars, number of seminars regarding Kargil and what happened. But you would agree with me that in the service, you can't be as free in talking to youngsters when the seniors are sitting next to you. No, it's a fact that I can. If Mohinder Puri is my senior in the Air Force and he was in charge of Kargil, I can't say so-and-so thing went wrong because I will not get promoted next time. No, I'm being very, very thing. So there is certain level of, you hold back when you are in the service. Now nobody can demote me or I can say what I want. But we held seminars. We tried to bring out whatever the things that went wrong, and they were taken quite thing. Like I said, we had problems in communication. We had problems in getting the correct type of bombs to Srinagar and Avantipur. We had problems getting our CFTs, crash fire tenders, which are absolutely vital for the aircraft to operate from those places. All that was a lot of created problems, but we carried on. Somehow we made a thing.
So I think we all three can agree that since we have all left the service, we can speak honestly right now. So all three of us can do so. Do you think such an effort should be even undertaken today, of revisiting the Kargil War, speaking to the people who are still participants of the war, to actually analyze what worked and didn't work for the Air Force and the Army for that matter?
Yeah, now that we are being frank, let me be frank also. 65 war, I was in Kalaikunda and we took a beating there. I was a pilot officer. I saw the 6 Sabres come in on the 7th of September, I think. They destroyed 4 vampires, loaded vampires, waiting to take off for a mission. Fortunately, they were facing away from the hangars in front of which they were parked on a tarmac. They attacked, they got 2 Canberras. All these 4 aircraft exploded, and it was something out of the world to see these 4 aircraft, bombs and rockets and front gun exploding in front of us. When I became senior enough and I was asked to talk about my experience in the wars after 71. 71 was a sea change. The Indian Air Force learnt about its mistakes from 65, and we incorporated those things, and we did a much better job during 1971. I took part in the war from Adhampur, flying the Sukhoi 7 aircraft. Now, when I was asked to talk about these 2 wars, I started talking. I said, look, as a pilot officer, when I saw these 4 aircraft exploding in front of me, my morale was going down. I was immediately told, because there was a large number of young officers sitting in front of me, I was told, do not use the word lowering of morale. You lower the morale of people here. Now I was trying to be honest, but I was told, no, don't use such terms. Be a little more, gentlemanly, try to. So, we occasionally refuse to face the truth as we should. I think that even, I don't know how it is now in the Air Force, but after Kargil, yes, we did some seminars, we did some corrections, but whether we are very honest with that, I do not know.
So in the Army, we had the ARK, like the Reddy Committee, which looked into that. But as far as I know, I don't know of any colonel who has read the ARK Reddy Committee. I'm sure it's lying somewhere, but it's not studied in the war colleges as far as I know. More importantly, I don't think they had access to Air Force documents or interviewed Air Force officials about its role. Were you interviewed by the ARK Reddy Committee? Have you read the ARK Reddy Committee? And more importantly, do you think we should let it out so that we can actually learn from it?
Sorry, which committee?
ARK Reddy Committee.
He was the Chief of Staff of Northern Command. So he was chairing the Reddy, A.R.K. Reddy. Well, I gave a presentation on the visit of the general officer to my division, and we clearly brought out what the lessons we learned from the war, and I think they must have been, but I've not read the because it's not been disseminated to the formations. It was at the army headquarters, and then it went to the art track, I think. The art track also carried out a complete study. So it's not that no study was done. The art track carried out a study. During the operations, the Director General Infantry sent a director, a colonel level officer, Colonel Tyagi, I think. He had gone and did a study of the entire operation, and he wrote a book subsequently on the Kargil operation. But he went to each battalion and he sort of made his own assessment and gave it to General Shankar Prasad, who was the DG Infantry at that time.
Thank you. A last question to both of you, and then we'll move to the strategic panel if you're fine with it. In the last 10 years since you have left, have you been invited to the war colleges to talk about the Kargil War?
Oh, no. We've not been, I have not been invited, certainly not. No.
So let me get this straight. So,
No, I have not been invited to thing. Earlier in my service career, I was invited to talk to College of Air Warfare and all. But recently I was invited to Air Force Station Gwalior. For the 20th anniversary of Kargil, as the Mirages took part, and I was able to talk about my experiences, and what I witnessed in Gwalior has gladdened my heart, because what the Air Force I left behind in 2004 is no longer the Air Force today. It's a completely brand new aircraft, brand new Air Force, which I'm really proud of. Thank you.
but to go back to my point, so since you have left service, none of the war colleges have found it fit to call the two operational commanders to teach their colonels, squadron leaders, wing commanders about...
No, nobody has called me.
All right, thank you so much, both you gentlemen. If I could ask you to go and sit down. Enjoy.